Exercise is good for fat loss. Don't get me wrong. But this is 7 reasons why NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, is going to be the biggest lever you can probably pull for fat loss. And this is not unfounded. This is pretty legit stuff. As a matter of fact, it's something that I've kind of pivoted on a little bit over the last few years, because I used to think maybe zone 2 cardio was the best because you oxidize a lot of fat. You certainly do. Okay, I used to think that HIIT was really good too, and I still do, but not as the primary driver for fat loss. Now, this is really interesting stuff. So non-exercise activity thermogenesis is just the fat that you're burning, the calories you're burning, your energy you're expending, just being you, like walking around doing the dishes, just the regular activity. This is my NEAT right now, talking like an Italian with my hands, right? That is one of Thomas DeLauer's non-exercise activity thermogenesis traits. We all have them. Some of us fidget, whatever. But there's reasons why it's more effective for fat loss. And the first one is really interesting. There was an interesting study that looked at this. 32,000 people, and they were looking at the adherence. So what they did is they took, in this case, adolescents, and they followed them around for years, even out of their adolescence. Okay, so 32,000 people. They had them either do 60 minutes per day of exercise or 60 minutes per day of increasing their non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Go out and mow the lawn, do this, do that. What they found is that there was a 60% adherence to the group that did the exercise for 60 minutes each day for a long period of time. But there was an 80% adherence for those that increased their non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Okay, well, then they looked at them as they aged. And as they aged, the group that did the exercise, that was still asked to do 60 minutes of exercise, there was a sharp drop off. Whereas the NEAT group just had a slight little drop. And it was just kind of, so it was much more sustainable. So over the long haul, the overall amount of calories burned was probably more with the NEAT. But you're probably thinking something along the lines of, well, my exercise burns a lot more calories than my NEAT does. So 60 minutes of exercise is not exactly the same as 60 minutes of NEAT. And yeah, when you look at calorie per calorie, maybe not. But if we look at what is called the constrained energy model, which is very valid data, essentially the more that we exercise, the less calories we burn from NEAT. And the less that we exercise, although still need some exercise, of course, the more calories we burn from NEAT. And that's just living life, not even making a concerted effort to add more NEAT in. We naturally burn more calories from our non-exercise activity thermogenesis when our exercise is a little bit lower, and we naturally burn less from our non-exercise activity thermogenesis when our exercise is higher. I love exercise, but I'm gonna ask you point blank, which method do you think it's easier on your brain and on your life to lose fat from? Probably just from living your life and losing fat through mowing the lawn and doing the dishes and keeping your spouse happy so you don't end up divorced, like those little things, right? Those things are important. So essentially the body seems to have a narrow range in which the amount of calories it wants us to kind of expend as far as energy expenditure. Again, exercise is important, but I don't think that it should be the primary driver of your overall weight loss. The more that you can just increase your activity, that is entirely number 2 here. That's the second benefit. You will burn more. You will burn more with less effort. And the more that you exercise, the less calories you will burn from that exercise. Think of it like this. If you go out for a run for 10 miles and you come back, I think your body is naturally going to fidget less. Like if you normally sat at the table and did stuff like this, unbeknownst to you, okay? But then you went for a 10-mile run and maybe you were going like this instead. Doing that for 8 hours may seem little, but you've got hundreds of those little things that add up that you're not even aware of, that are happening completely unbeknownst to you unconsciously. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So it's finding that balance. The more you can leverage doing things like this, I think everyone should do that. It's pretty cool. The more you can probably get fat loss out of it. Number 3, it's better for longevity overall to have a lot of healthy, active lifestyle habits than it is to have sort of this unhealthy relationship with exercise. As someone that has had both an unhealthy relationship with exercise and now I think a more healthy relationship with exercise, I can tell you that a large amount of people that exercise don't have a good relationship with it. Either they're using it and abusing it in a certain way, or they're almost psychologically tormented into doing it. And I feel like part of that is the fitness industry painting it in such a way. I totally agree. But exercise should be fun, right? Like we should enjoy it. So if exercise starts to become, I don't want to say unenjoyable, because exercise isn't really like enjoyable. Like it kind of hurts. But if it starts becoming something you truly don't want to do, it might be something that you've pushed too far, right? And if you look at the populations in the world that really do live the longest, they're not the ones that have some of the highest activity levels in the world. They're the ones that just have the highest overall energy expenditure because they're walking around, they're active, not because they have defined what's called physical activity. Russia is actually a really good example. Like Russia has some of the highest physical activity levels in the world and some of the highest vigorous activity levels, but they also have some of the shortest life expectancies. And a lot of that is because look at their environment. It's cold and stuff like that. So maybe they exercise, but then maybe they're not as active and moving around as much. And maybe there's just lifestyle factor. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Russia, but I do know that I found that very interesting. Number 4 is non-exercise activity thermogenesis is insanely good for managing your glucose. If your glucose and your insulin levels are chronically high, that's going to inhibit fat loss, big time. Because insulin, by its very nature, inhibits fat loss. It impedes the action of the enzymes that allow you to start breaking off fatty acids from a glycerol molecule and allow you to burn fat in the first place. Now, what was wild for me, I knew that exercise impacted my glucose, but I had no idea how much just moving around impacted my glucose. More than exercise, significantly more than exercise. I started wearing a continuous glucose monitor, and when I did that, I realized just how powerful the impact of doing the dishes was. It is so wild. For those of you that struggle with like a metabolic issue or maybe some high blood sugar or insulin resistance, or you just want to have an idea of like where your glucose stands, I put a link for one of our sponsors down below called Signos. If you want to be able to wear a continuous glucose monitor. Now, full disclaimer, this is a sponsored placement, but it's also relevant, and a lot of people that watch my videos want to know the things that I use. So Signos allows you to get a Dexcom G7. They use the new G7 continuous glucose monitor. So you no longer have to be a diabetic to wear a continuous glucose monitor, and you can see in real time what a certain food is doing to you. It's fascinating. So like you can say, okay, I'm gonna eat this hamburger. How much does my glucose spike? But then more importantly, I'm gonna eat this hamburger and then I'm gonna go do the dishes. Or I'm gonna go for a run. And you can kind of see how things balance out and what happens to your blood glucose. Cool thing is Signos is a really neat app that goes along with it that coaches you and helps find your healthy ranges. It's really cool algorithmic technology. So combine the G7 Dexcom along with Signos, it's really awesome. And Signos is what makes it so that a regular person can go out and get a continuous glucose monitor. So that link down below is a 15% off discount link. So it's in the top line of the description. I recommend you try it if you're curious at all to how your body responds to specific foods, because it's fascinating literature when you look at how much glucose can impact our daily lives. That link is down below. Number 5, you increase your baseline. Now, there's a chart that's on the screen right now. And that chart that's on the screen right now, I've referenced in a couple other videos. It's that constrained energy model I talked about, okay? So with that chart, you can see that most of the calories are going to be burned from your baseline calories. So that's gonna be your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, but it's also going to be just your resting metabolic rate, what it takes to be alive. The more that you can increase your baseline, the more that exercise is going to be gravy on top of it. The moment you rely on exercise, you're actually decreasing your baseline. Wouldn't you rather have a heavy baseline of burning calories? So then your body's sort of like, okay, this is the norm. We burn calories at this rate. And then occasionally you have this exercise that's like, whoa, let's burn some extra. So it might actually come as more of a shock, and then you might get more impact out of exercise if your baseline is higher. Number 6 is it actually changes your lifestyle over time. I can't remember where I read it before, but there's some literature that says it basically takes a couple of years for your body to start to find a new set point with activity. For example, I was sedentary for a long period of my life, but I broke out of that by being very active for like the past 10, 12, 13 years actually. So now my baseline and my set point is much higher. So by doing things like, hey, taking the stairs, or by parking further away in the parking lot, by taking some laps around the perimeter of the grocery store, by scrubbing that pan aggressively, by mopping the floors. If you do those little things every day, eventually that becomes your lifestyle, and that becomes the rate of your energy expenditure over the course of the day. Just like if you were to run 5 miles every morning, your body's going to adapt to running 5 miles every morning, which is good and it's bad. But if you're constantly moving throughout the day doing different things, you're just increasing this energy baseline, energy output baseline, and it's making it so that your body will adapt. So it will become a lifestyle, and it won't become something you have to think about. Number 7 is very similar to that, except somewhat the opposite. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis, you won't develop as much of an efficiency. What do I mean by this? If I went out again for a run today, and then I kept doing this again for a year, if I burned 500 calories on that run today, if I ran the same distance a year from now and I was continually, quote unquote, training, I might only burn 300 calories from that run. The efficiency and sort of economy of scale of learning to run properly, I'm getting more efficient, so I'm burning less. That's why it's getting easier. So unless I want to succumb myself to constant torture and like make it miserable every time, I'm just going to eventually burn less and less calories. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis, it's very difficult for you to develop an efficiency across various movement patterns. So you're constantly having a new adaptation, because maybe you're fidgeting in this particular motion today like this. Maybe you're fidgeting in this particular motion tomorrow. You're just fidgeting because you're anxious. Or maybe you're scrubbing the beef off of a pan like this today, and maybe you're scrubbing the eggs with a spatula tomorrow, right? You're doing different motions. There's less overall economy that happens. It's less efficiency. Whereas exercise, it's all about efficiency. Now, don't get me wrong, with exercise, you can definitely mix it up so that you're not efficient, but it happens a little more naturally when it comes down to NEAT. And the last and final one, you're not thinking about NEAT. It takes less of your mental bandwidth. It doesn't drain your willpower. It doesn't drain your willpower to go take the dog on a quick walk, or it doesn't drain your willpower to go, heck, have sex, right? If anything, it might lift up your willpower, but it probably depletes a little bit if you're torturing yourself all the time. And this may sound like an anti-exercise person. Hopefully you know by looking at me that I'm not. I'm just a realist, and I've been overweight before. And these are some of the things I wish I kind of did so that I didn't damage myself quite as much. I'll see you tomorrow.